session on environmental effects on behavioral welfare. My name is Stephanie Buys. I work at the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute in Belfast. And we have a very nice and varied program for you in this session with quite a few online speakers and a few people who will be joining us in person. Our first speaker will be Karin Schutz from Ag Research Limited. And she will be talking about changing milking and feeding times to reduce heat stress in pasture-based dairy systems. So with that, Karen, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and good evening from New Zealand. So I would just like to share some results from a study where we investigated different management strategies to reduce heat load in dairy cows managed on pasture. And first, I would just like to acknowledge my co-authors, Frankie Haddett, Neil Cox, and Cassandra Tucker. So heat stress in dairy cows is a global issue that impairs welfare and milk production. A lactating cow is generating a lot of heat associated with making milk and rumination. And cows start to respond to warm weather at temperatures around 21 to 23 degrees Celsius, depending on humidity levels. To maintain normal body temperature, cows use shade if possible, and they increase respiration rate and water intake. If the animals cannot stay cool, there will be an increase in body temperature, which in turn will lead to negative consequences. And perhaps the most recognized effect of warm weather is a decrease in feed intake and milk production. Heat stress can also lead to a number of health and reproduction problems, and can even lead to death in some situations. So research has shown that both shade access and the use of water cooling are effective in reducing heat load. Both reduce respiration rate and body temperature and improve production. Shade is a very valuable resource to cows in summer, but cooling with water is more efficient than shade alone. And it's quite common for farms in New Zealand to use sprinklers before afternoon milking. About 40% of large herds operations in New Zealand report that they use sprinklers before milking. The sprinklers only provide relief from the heat when animals are milked in the afternoon, and it's not always possible to provide shade for all cows in summer. New Zealand has a rotational grazing system where large herds rotate through a high number of pastures, and it can be very challenging for farmers to provide shade to all cows in summer. So we'd be interested in investigating if there are other low-cost management options that can reduce the heat load in dairy cows managed on pasture. And specifically, we wanted to answer the question if we can reduce heat load by milking and feeding later when it's cooler, or milking only in the morning. So we designed 5 treatments. All the cows were milked in the morning and fed after that. And then the treatments were applied in the afternoon or in the evening. So the control treatment was what most farmers in New Zealand do. They milk and feed the cows in the morning and again in the afternoon when it can be very warm. In this case, cows were milked around 4 p.m. And fed after that. In the second treatment, cows were milked in the afternoon, but fed later in the evening, just after 8 p.m. So here we were hoping to reduce the heat generated by feeding and ruminating to when it's cooler, but the cows were still walking to milking in the afternoon. In the third treatment, we delayed milking to the evening, but the cows were fed in the afternoon. So here we aimed to reduce the heat that was generated by walking into milking. And for the cows in the fourth treatment, we delayed both milking and feeding to the evening when it starts to cool off. The fifth treatment was a once-a-day milking, which is quite popular with New Zealand farmers in summer. So here the cows were only milked once in the morning, but they were fed a second time in the afternoon. So these cows did not have to walk into milking in the afternoon. So our prediction was that delaying both milking and feeding to later in the evening, as well as milking cows only in the morning, would reduce the heat load compared to the control treatment. So the study was carried out over 24 days in summer. We had 60 dairy cows divided into the 5 treatments, and we had 3 groups per treatment with 4 cows per group. And the cows were given a new area of pasture twice daily, and they were also given some silage in the morning. We measured body temperature using Star-Oddy data loggers, and hobo activity loggers measured lying behavior, and we used cow monitor ear tags to measure grazing and ruminating behavior. We also recorded individual milk production, and also manually we recorded respiration rate 3 times throughout the day when the cows were on pasture. And we also recorded respiration rate before milking when the cows were waiting in the yards to be milked, and also after milking before the cows were led back to pasture. So overall, there were very few significant treatment differences, but there were many treatment by time of day interactions. So the treatment that stood out the most was the once-a-day treatment. So just for simplicity, in some of the slides, I will present the results for the once-a-day cows compared to the controls separately. So this figure shows the diurnal body temperature on the 2 warmest days of the study. So the dark blue line is the control treatment, and this pattern is very typical for body temperature for New Zealand cows in summer. So as you can see, there is a peak in body temperature in the afternoon when the cows walk into milking. There's also a smaller peak around the time of walking into morning milking. The light blue line is the once-a-day cows. And as you can see here, they don't have the same peak in body temperature in the afternoon, likely because they don't have to walk into milking. So when we add the other treatments to the same figure, you can see the green line that the cows that were fed in the afternoon before going into milking had the highest body temperature. And this is likely because they were grazing, then they had to walk, and then they had to graze again. So these cows seem to be generating a lot of heat. The body temperature of the cows that had delayed milking and feeding, which is the purple line, pretty much tracked the once-a-day cows, and these cows had lower body temperature on warm days. So from this figure, we can see that milking cows once a day and delaying milking and feeding seem quite promising in reducing heat load in summer. So this figure instead shows the respiration rate throughout the day. So the respiration rate increases with air temperature and external heat load. And as you can see, the once-a-day cows had lower respiration rates than the controls during the day. So again, if we add the other treatments, you can see that all treatments had lower respiration rate than the controls. And the once-a-day cows and cows with delayed feeding had the lowest respiration rates. And the cows with delayed milking and feeding were intermediate. So this figure shows the diurnal pattern of grazing. So you can see here that the controls and the once-a-day cows have very similar patterns, except for just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the controls go into afternoon milking. And when we add the other treatments to this figure, you can see that all cows have the same peak in grazing time after morning milking when they are fed, but the grazing pattern differed depending on treatment in the afternoon and in the evening. So the cows with delayed milking, which is the green line, start feeding before going into milking in the evening and then continue when they come back to the paddock, for example. But otherwise, the take-home message from this figure is that cows graze more after fresh feed is provided, which is not very surprising. I'm not showing it here, but the rumination pattern pretty much followed the grazing events. So this figure shows the diurnal pattern of lying down and resting. So cows that were fed later in the evening, which is the red and purple lines, spend more time lying in the afternoon and early evening. But all treatments that had anything delayed, being milking or feeding, spent less time lying down later in the evening compared to controls and once-a-day cows because they were being milked or grazing. And numerically, these 3 treatments spend less time lying compared to controls and once-a-day cows. In general, cows don't like to lie down when it's warm, which it's mostly during the day in summer. And we do need to explore further what this means to cows if they have to do other things than rest during the nighttime. So finally, we analyzed milk yield as the difference from baseline before the treatment started. So the red lines in this figure represents treatment averages of the difference in milk yield from baseline. There was an overall decline in milk yield over time, which is normal for this time of year. But the decline in milk production was greatest for the once-a-day cows. And this was also the only treatment that was significantly different from the baseline. Milking cows once a day does reduce milk production, so this was not perhaps very surprising. Cows that had delayed milking and feeding had the numerically lowest reduction in milk production. It looks kind of promising, but we do need to repeat this with more numbers, with more cows. There were only 12 cows per treatment split into 3 groups, which is not really enough to detect the difference in milk production. In this study, we've shown that changing milking and feeding times can be used to change diurnal patterns of behavior, but we do need to know more about what this means in terms of welfare and production. The once-a-day cows produced less milk, and they had numerically they spent more time lying and grazing, and they might have experienced lower heat load as indicated by lower body temperature on warm days and low respiration rate. And this is likely due to the lower metabolic heat production and the fact that they don't have to walk to milking during the warmest part of the day. So the once-a-day milking seems like a good management practice to reduce heat stress in summer. And lastly, milking and feeding later in the evening does seem promising in terms of reducing heat load and improving milk production, but we do need more studies with more cows to confirm this. And we would just like to thank Dairy New Zealand and Egg Research staff who helped with this study. And I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. Are there any questions from the floor? If not, I will start off. I was wondering, Karen, a lot of these strategies would have quite big implications for farmers' time management if you would use them in commercial practice. How do farmers react to strategies like this if you talk to them about it?
Well, changing milking times. Well, the once-a-day milking, first of all, it's very popular because it reduces labor and feed, etc., and gives farmers more time to spend with the families in summer. Delaying milking is also, that's okay. The other strategies farmers wouldn't typically do, of course. It was more a way for us to try and study what generates most heat, like the walking or the feeding and ruminating. So farmers wouldn't typically do that, but delaying milking and feeding, it's not for everyone to have to milk later in the evening. Another thing that's quite popular too is it's called 3 in 2. So farmers milk 3 times in kind of 2 days, which is, it's kind of even weirder because then you have different milking times on different days, but that's also quite popular to kind of reduce milking frequency of the animals. Kiwis like to do things a little bit differently sometimes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay. Right. If not, oh, There's a question over there.
Hey, Karen, Pinnes in Sweden. Just wondering if this could actually be applied in a way that the farmers would have to look at the weather forecast and then adjust milking based on that. Would that be an option, or might that might not reduce the loss of milk due to heat, but it might reduce the increase in body temperature of the cow? What do you think about that? Did you understand the question?
Yeah, and I think, and nice to see you again, by the way. But yeah, I think some farmers do that. Like when there is warm weather coming, that they do change their milking times to to make it a little bit cooler for the animals, because it's hard work for farmers too to get the cows in to walk in peak heat of the day. I mean, there are the things that they do too. They choose paddocks that are closer to the shed, so they don't have to walk so far, and things like that. So there are definitely things they can do. And I mean, if there's a really warm, and especially the once a day milking strategy, I think a lot of farmers, if there is a shortage of grass, or if it's, you know, drought coming, then they definitely many switch to once a day milking, only milk in the morning. Yeah.
Okay, again, thank you very much, Karen. This is all what we will have time for. Let's thank Karen again.
Thank you.
And then our next presenter will also be online, and this is Janne Winter Christensen from Aarhus University, and she will present on shelter-seeking behavior in horses.
Hello.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Share my screen. Okay, so I hope you hear me and see me.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, and
Great.
looks fine on this end.
It's good. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you. It would have been very nice, but unfortunately it didn't work out this year. So I'm very pleased that the organizers made it possible to participate from home, and especially to present as well. That's very nice. Yes, so I'd like to present some results that we have on shelter-seeking behavior in horses during summer. And I'll start my presentation with a poo, because this photo was took that a few years ago. We were collecting fecal samples from horses because we wanted to record cortisol. But we had to be really, really fast, because within a minute, the dropping would look like this. And indeed, some areas in Denmark, we have a lot of flies. However, these guys are not the ones that bother horses and other grazing animals the most, because the ones that are really bothering to horses and cattle, for example, are the blood-sucking insects such as the midges and mosquitoes and the tabernets. And I think most people that have horses know the tabernets as horse flies. They're the really annoying ones that have a really nasty bite. And these are known to decrease the welfare of grazing animals because they disturb their resting behavior and their feeding behavior and their locomotory behavior. And also known that insects can act as vectors of bacteria and viruses and causing diseases. And also some insects, such as, for example, the midges in horses, can cause allergies. It's an allergy called summer eczema, which is quite a severe disease or condition in horses. So some previous studies found reduced insect harassment of horses that had access to shelters. However, in Denmark and many other countries, there are no requirements for shelter access for horses during summer. So there are requirements for access during winter, but not during summer. So in this study, we wanted to investigate voluntary use of artificial shelters by 10 horse groups during 8 summer weeks. And we just used a convenient sample of horse groups. These were private horse groups. We had 42 horses in total, 3 to 5 horses per group. And there were a variety of breeds, so representing the most common horse breeds in Denmark, various ages and sexes as well. And they had access to various shelter types. So the shelters varied in size, for example, and design and number of entrances. But we just simply recorded use of the shelters that the horses had access to already. We then mounted wildlife cameras inside the shelters, and sometimes we had to mount several cameras to cover the entire space. And we recorded shelter use every 30 minutes. So 48 recordings per 24 hours per group for 56 days. So that means we had 2,688 recordings per group. So a lot of photos to look through. And on these photos, we could identify the horses that were inside and what they were doing. So for example, on this photo here, you can see 2 horses lying. There's a pony lying in the back and the horse in front, and 2 horses standing. We then also recorded the daily weather conditions, and we were interested in insect activity. So as an estimate of insect activity, we used trap catches of tabanids. And we used the trap that is shown here on the photo, and there was a trap placed just outside the shelter. And tabanids are attracted to this black rubber ball that hangs in this trap. And when they discover that they did not land on a horse, they will usually take off upwards, and then they will be caught in the container in the top of the trap. So this photo here of the container, this is one of our largest captures of tabanids. I think we had around 200 tabanids in that 24-hour capture. So we then brought them back to the laboratory and categorized them and counted them. So we did one of these captures per week per group. So one 24-hour capture of tabanids for each group during the 8 weeks. So our overall results showed that shelter-seeking behavior in horses was related to temperature, because the horses used the shelters more on warmer days. And it was also related to wind speed and humidity. So if there's a lot of wind and if it was raining, the horses used the shelters less. We were particularly interested in comparing cold summer days and warm summer days, because we have a lot of average summer days in Denmark. So we made an average of the 7 coldest days and the 7 warmest days. And that's what you see on the graph here. So the black bars are the coldest days, 7 coldest days, and the gray bars are the 7 warmest days. I should say that on the warmest days in Denmark, that corresponds to a 24-hour temperature of 22 degrees. And the coldest days, that's an average of 12 degrees. So I know there are other places where summers get a lot warmer than they get here. But anyway, what we can see here is that shelter-seeking behavior in horses did not differ during night on cold and warm days, but they increased their use of the shelters significantly during the day and during the evening on the warmer days. And if we then look at shelter-seeking behavior in relation to our catch of tabanids in the insect trap, the 2 light gray bars are the days with the lowest catch of tabanids for each group, and the 2 dark gray bars are the 2 days where we caught the highest number of tabanids for each group. So as you can see here, the horses used their shelters significantly more on the days with a higher trap catch of tabanids. We could also see that there was a huge variation in how much the horses used their shelters. For example, in one group, there was at least 1 horse inside on almost 55% of the photos. So that's what you see here. So this group 5 had a horse inside, at least 1 horse inside on almost 55%. Whereas another group had a very low shelter use, this group 7. They only had at least 1 horse inside on approximately 7% of their photos. And this group had access to a rather small shelter. There were less than 3 square meters per horse, and the shelter was open on both sides, meaning that it probably provided less of a refuge against insects. We also looked at the percentage of photos where all horses were inside at the same time. And as you can see here, 5 of the 10 groups had a very low percentage of horses of photos. So all horses in the group were inside at the same time. So 1% or less than 1% of the photos. So this would indicate that these shelter designs are probably not optimal for horses. And on our photos, we could often spot the remaining group members standing just outside the entrance. So they were likely motivated to enter as well, but were prevented from doing so, perhaps by another horse standing in the entrance. And if we just look at this group 2, you can see almost 20% of their photos had all horses inside. And what was special about this group was that they had access to a rather large shelter with 3 entrances. So they're probably less likely to be blocked by a sort of a high horse of a high social status standing in the entrance. So although our study was of course not designed to investigate the optimal shelter design, we could our results would suggest that many of the shelters that are in use currently are probably not optimal in terms of allowing all horses in a group access to the shelter. And we could also see that shelter use was related to insect avoidance, probably rather than shade seeking, because all horse groups had access to natural shade outside. So this increased use of the shelters on warmer days probably related to more insect prevalence on the warmer days. So finally, we would recommend access to shelters during summer, particularly if horses are kept in areas with limited opportunities to seek natural refuge from insect harassment. And finally, I just said if you're interested in the details, we just had our paper published, so you can find more details about the study here. And so I'll just end with a photo of a tabinet landing on the trap instead of on the horse. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jana. Are there any questions? Yes, over there, Bertha.
Hi, thank you. Peter Nielsen, U4. Yeah, I know this is a talk about horses, but is there any way of knowing or predicting when horsefly populations will be large? Is that linked to day temperature, for instance?
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you. Well, yes, the prevalence of insects is linked to, so it's interrelated, the temperature and the activity of the insects. There's some population of blood-sucking insects, for example, the midges, have particular periods where there is more active than other periods, for example, at dawn and dusk, and they're more active in May and September. And for the horseflies, they're generally more active in June and July and first half of August. And they're mainly active during sunny days. So when it's warm and sunny and not too much wind, that's also when they are most active. So yes, it's possible to foresee the insect activity from the weather forecast.
Okay, there's another question here in front.
Hi, Jake Rundle-Worthington from We're on Mammals. I'm actually just following on from Berta's question. I noticed in how you presented the bars for cold and hot days, and you segmented it into 4 time slots. I think it was midnight to 6, 6 till 12, 12 to 18, 18 to 24. So my question is, what was there reasoning behind segmenting it into those time slots? And is sort of following on from what Berta was saying, is there a way of looking at it in terms of what daylight hours these tabanids are more active during.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it could be segmented into other time periods as well. So this was a suggestion from my colleague, who's a scientist, works with insects. So he says that in the night, so between midnight and 6, that usually be very low insect activity. And then as the sun rises and it starts to get a bit warmer, that's when insect activity starts as well. And we have this shift in the types of insects. So in the evening, it's more the mosquitoes and the midges that are active, and in the 2 time slots in the middle of the day, it will usually be the tabanids. You could consider joining the 2 time slots in the middle of the day, so from 6 to 18, because that's the main activity of horseflies. Whereas the evening, that's more the midges and the mosquitoes. But the midges can also be active in the morning between 6 and 12. So that was why he suggested splitting it up into these. But of course, it is sort of an artificial splitting up of the data, but it was based on his knowledge regarding when insects would be active.
Okay, thank you again, Janne. That's all we have time for right now. So we will go over to the next speaker, who is actually here in person. Thank you very much, Judith. So our next student is Judith Vos from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and she will be speaking on jet aircraft flights over sheep pasture. The floor is yours, Judith.
Thank you. So yes, it will be a more special topic. And we will start with smooth takeoff. And so sound is vibration, which propagates as an acoustic wave through a transmission medium, such as the air. In order to be a stressor, like an unpleasant experience of the sound, we know that there are several factors. Some factors we can measure, like the loudness and the spectrogram of the sound. And other factors which we often rely to in stress biology: predictability, frequency, duration, novelty, and the former experience of the animal and associations with the sound. But I want to highlight that especially with acoustic signals, we often neglect to think about the differences between species and the sensory capacity of the species and the differences in the processing. And we can think about the species, but also lower level at individual level, age of the animal, the hormonal status, the present attention, the activity the animal is engaged in, and so on. You can name your factors. So all these complex picture makes it really hard to predict how a sound will have an effect on the animal or not. So what is it to be a sheep? We know that sheep have much better hearing abilities than we do. It is actually comparable to dogs. They can hear up to much higher frequencies, and their sensitivity peak is at really higher range than ours. So just think about that. We think that sheep are simple, but actually their hearing abilities are comparable to dogs. Of course, there were some studies done on sheep before in relation to acoustic stimulation, but most of them were done with playback experiments, like recording the sounds and playing it back as a continuous background noise. There were some experiments with sudden noises as well, but in the results, and this is what I would like to highlight here, we see a lot of inconclusive results. So in some studies, they saw increased, in others, or within the same study, decreased plasma cortisol, and the weight gain and the feeding efficiency could be increased, same or lower. And the same with the feeding times and the time moving. And some studies found that why sheep could habituate to loud noises, but other studies found that they developed sensitization. So they accumulate the negative effects. So we cannot really extrapolate from this. The results are depending on the actual stimuli and the animals. So jet flights, why are they special? They are special because they produce high sound and a highly variable spectrogram. And they fly in different directions. So all the sound which comes to the subject is dependent not only on the jet flights, but the direction and the terrain and the animals and the vegetation and so on. So all of these make this sound unpredictable. It is really high and it is sudden, and these jet flights don't fly regularly. So the frequency is quite rare, the animals to get habituated to the sound. So that's why in Norway, producers who have sheep on pasture during the summertime for 16 weeks, they can be concerned about what happens with the animals there, both the sheep and the lambs, when they are exposed to jet overflights. And this led to our research questions: to what extent do sheep on pasture react to military jet overflights? And we hypothesized that since the jet produce a highly variable sound picture and an unpredictable pattern, and in their visual appearance, they may resemble to an area predator, which can trigger an flight response in animals. Sheep will also react with flight response, and they will not habituate to the jet overflights. So we observed 8 flocks, including both adult and lambs on pasture. These flocks were on the summer pasture for 5 months at the time of the study. They were exposed regularly to civilian flights and irregularly to flights of older type, jet flights of older type, like F-16, which have a really distinctive sound picture than the F-35 jets, which were in the focus of our study. We were lucky, so to say, the military Air Force had a training session in that area of the observation, which lasted for 6 days, where they had these intensive flying periods in the morning and early afternoon and late afternoon. So we observed these 8 flocks, 2 to 4 days, we video recorded the animals. And after that, we chose 1 video with overflight and 1 video with silence, so a quiet period for each day per flock. These were 1 to 3 minute video shortages, and we registered the animals showing different activities within 10-second scans. And these activities were general activities like grazing, walking, and lying. They were some behaviors associated with flight response, like vocalization and running. And there were some behaviors which were meant to indicate alert behaviors, like head lifting and ear orientation in an alert position. And there were some decibel readings registered as well. And we measured 85 to 111 decibels, which is quite high. And it was really variable. To the behaviors. So the flight behaviors, we did not see really extreme flight behaviors. Running and vocalizations occurred sporadically, so rare that we did not run any statistics on them. For example, in this flock, we observed running, but it was more a playful way, but not enough to run statistics on that. Okay, the more general behaviors, lying first. And here you can see that we tested the effect of condition, whether it was under control or under overflight. And the time effect, the period of the day, like morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, and the day of observation 1 to 6, and some interactions. And on the figures, you can see the morning, early afternoon, and late afternoon, and then the proportion of animals which were lying. And these are the predicted data from the models. with green the proportions from the control situation, and with yellow from overflights. The different letters indicate differences within conditions. So for example, you can see that early morning and early morning or early afternoon, there was more lying than late afternoon within the control situation, while it was low, high, and low in the overflight situation. And the asterisk indicate differences between conditions within time period. So what I would like to highlight here is that there was a change in the normal circadian rhythm of flying when it came to overflight, and in the morning period, the lying was lower with overflight compared to the controls. And of course, there was some day association, but it was general, irrespective of conditions. When it came to grazing, it was the opposite pattern. Grazing was more frequent in periods with overflight, especially in the morning and early afternoon periods. And there was an interaction between day of observation and condition. And what you have to keep in mind that the control condition had a steeper slope down. When it comes to walking, again, there was a steeper slope in the control condition, but it was upwards. And there was no interaction with the period, and there was a general effect of the day, of the period. Sorry. And the ear orientation in the control condition, it was higher in late afternoon, while it was no effect of period under overflight. So as a discussion, I can say that there were minor differences between the conditions, because I will now focus on the conditions. And there were no major flight reactions, which were a little bit against our hypothesis. As a summary about the more common behaviors, sheep under overflight showed less lying, walking, ear orientation, and more grazing. And this was a little bit surprising, and I tried to discuss them. So less lying was observed, which is okay, because it shows me that maybe the lying can be seen as a vulnerable behavior and lower arousal activity. And it was less observed under overflight. That's fine. It was less walking under overflight. I think it is due to being alert, and what we see less under overflight is the relaxed type of walking. So maybe they were stopping and paying attention. We saw less ear orientation under overflight, maybe because overflight was shadowing other sounds. So that's why sheep were not paying so much attention to the surroundings with the acoustic following of what is going on. And surprisingly, we saw more grazing under overflights. And this was the most surprising result, I think. However, there were some other studies showing that there were higher weight gain at moderate loud noise compared to control or really loud noise. So it may be that these kind of overflights are of low stress level, and the grazing behavior is not stopped like as a sudden stop in the behavior, but maybe a displacement behavior. And the conclusion, overflights had some effects on sheep behavior, but these were mild and not consistently present in the sample of aircraft experienced animals. Across the week of observation, the sheep also showed some signs of familiarization to overflights by jets of a type they had not previously encountered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. Any questions from the floor? I was wondering, Judith, what are the odds for a sheep to outrun an aerial predator? I don't know a lot about sheep, but they don't seem too quick. Is that a useful flight response for them in this situation?
Well, I think so. sheep in this area live in a mountainous area with forests and open grassy areas. And we see that when there's more predation from bears or eagles, they move more to the more forested areas. So I think this might be a shelter-seeking behavior. I don't know whether it happens immediately, like a really quick run or not, but they definitely change the core areas they are moving in when there's higher predation.
Okay, thank you. Question here in front.
It's working, yes, okay. Marco Zipek, University of Norway, as well as you did. But I was just thinking about the impact. Do you already have some background how the flights and everything, is it actually having how much impact on the animal? Yeah.
So whether they have impact on the sheep or other animals? No, this is the only, well, there was some preliminary studies done in another area with other kind of animals. And there was one flock and there was no sign of reaction there. Now this is I think the only study about effect of jet flies on sheep.
Okay. Thank you again, Judith, for your presentation. And we will move on to the next speaker in the program, who will be joining us online again. Her name is Marie Rompon, and she is from the University of Bern and will be telling us about long-term consequences of forage presentation on horses' welfare. The floor is yours, Marie.
Oh. Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. And the video should start, sorry. Perfect. I think now it's working. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm really happy to be here. And today I'm gonna present you a study about forage presentation and its association with horses' health and behavior. So first of all, a little bit of a context about horses' natural feeding behavior. Well, as you may know, horses are grazing animals, so they spend most of their day foraging or grazing. They usually don't perform long fasting period, and they perform around 50,000 chews per day. 50,000. So now, how can we use this figure for our horses, our domestic horses? Well, we can infer that our horses should also spend most of their day feeding, which means they also should have feeding boots during the night, which is not always the case, and they should have a diet high in fiber so it can induce chewing activity. So looking at all of this, it looks quite simple. One can wonder why we just don't feed ad libitum hay to horses. Well, it's because in Switzerland and in most European countries, actually, lots of horses are leisure horses, and most of them are what we call easy keepers, meaning that if we provide them ad libitum hay, they will put some weight on, and then we have another health issue. So what solution do we have? Well, one of the options we would have would be to decrease the ingestion speed. And that's exactly what slow feeders are made for. So slow feeders are dispensers that mechanically slow down hay ingestion, and they're getting more and more common. And as you can see, there are lots of different kinds of slow feeders. But actually, what do we really know about these so-called slow feeders? What has been already studied? Well, there were lots of... Yes.
Your slides are not changing here, so I think you still need to either put it in presentation modus, or otherwise click through the slide.
Are you still at the introduction part, or what?
Okay, very good. Sorry, I thought you wanted us to already see something on the slide. I apologize. Please continue.
No. Okay. Do you see like the what has been studied slide?
We just see the PowerPoint view, not the slideshow view.
sorry, what? Okay, what's going on? And so did you see like the beginning of the PowerPoint or?
No, we were just on your first slide and it still hasn't changed over to.
Okay, so here, do you see the second slide? It worked just when we tested before. Is it working now or?
It was just working, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so shall I start again or no? Sorry, so slow feeders. Okay, then I will just start again where I was. Sorry for this. So what has been studied in slow feeders? Well, there were actually lots of study about their efficiency to decrease ingestion speed, and they all agreed that slow feeders were efficient, even though they were big inter-individual variation. There were also some study about the short-term effects on welfare, and one study found out that horses using slow feeder were friendlier to humans. There was also one study about short-term effect on health, and they found out that horses using slow feeder are more tension in the neck. But to my knowledge, at least, there were no studies about the long-term effects on both health and behavior. So the aim of this study was to first evaluate the association between the use of slow feeder and the horse's welfare, and also to compare different forage presentations. So various dispenser, loose hay, and so on. And our hypothesis were that horses using slow feeder might display more gums, issue, and different emotional tension, but that they would also be friendlier than control horses, according to the literature. But we also thought that the effect on the musculoskeletal health will depend more on the dispenser characteristic rather than this dispenser being a slow feeder or not. So the study design, it was a descriptive study with 2 cohorts, so slow feeding and control horses. Horses were only assessed once. And because we knew the sampling would be of great importance because of lots of potential confounding factors found in the literature, I decided to perform a stratified sampling with age, housing, riding frequency, and shoes as strata. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to discuss this, but feel free to ask a question. The data collection, first of all, the health data. So we were looking at the vibrissae length, and also at the state of gum. And there was also an osteopathic assessment. And the osteopath was giving a score from 0 to 3 to each structure, so either joint or muscle. And we were adding this score at the end to have a total musculoskeletal health, so MHA score. Behavioral data, we had 2 human reactivity tests. So one was when the horse was free, and we were looking at the horse's response. And the other one was when the horse was tied, and the protocol was similar, but we have different notation because we are really looking at 4 different traits. For each presentation, we're also recording the type of dispenser, if it was a slow feeding or not, the height, mobility, inclination, and so on. And of course, we also gather other information. The data collection, it took place over 2 years, and we finished last June. We were able to assess 702 horses in 91 different places. And horses were mainly from horse riding centers or private stable, or horses that were housed at their owner place. So first of all, we tried to look at the association between the use of slow feeder and the health and behavioral data. We used, so for that, we used the logistic regression and a stepwise selection. And the model that was selected was using vibrissae length and gums condition. So if we look a bit closer for vibrissae length, so we had a categorical data that went from completely a total wear of vibrissae that we called trim vibrissae, even though it was obviously not trimmed by humans, to very long vibrissae. But we also had what we called fluff, so it was really thin hair that had developed on the horse's nose. And if we look at the proportion of horses from the 2 cohorts within the different length category, we can see that the longer the vibrissae, the less horses from the slow feeding cohort we have. So we really have a clear association between use of slow feeder and vibrissae length. And moreover, if we pull the total absence of vibrissae and all the other lengths, we have a risk ratio, of 2.26. So horses with slow feeder are almost 2.5 times more likely to display trim vibrissae. And what we were also able to see is that 56% of horses with total wear had a total wear due to slow feeding, but it's only 56%. And as you can see here, even horses from the control cohort were sometimes displaying trim vibrissae. So we looked at it, and it seems that yes, indeed, we have confounding factor. For example, if looking at the housing, we could see that horses housed outside were more prone to have short or trim vibrissae than horses housed inside. So for the gums condition, it was kind of similar. It was also categorical data from pale yellow to inflamed, and we can really see that the more inflamed the vibrissae, the more horses from the slow feeding cohort we have. However, here I really want to highlight the fact that the baseline should be normal or slightly pale, but not pale and yellow. So we also had an issue associated with the control cohort. So now we can wonder about human reactivity and total MHA score because they were not selected in the model. Well, when looking at human reactivity, we didn't find any association between the use of slow feeder and human reactivity. And this was in contradiction with what was suggested in the literature. However, when we looked at it, we found association between the human reactivity tide test and the MHA score. So if we look really quickly at the friendliness, for example, we can see that on the bottom axis, you have the friendliness of horses, and you can see that all horses that were not friendly or a bit friendly were having the same total MHA score, kind of similar. But for horses that were really, really friendly to humans, these horses had less osteopathic issues than other horses. And for fearfulness, here it was even clearer. So here, of course, so you have the aggressive, the fearfulness, and you can really see that the more fearful the horse were, the more osteopathic issues the horses were displaying. And then, so we can now for the total MHA score, well, we didn't find any difference between the two cohorts, which also explain why we didn't have any association between slow feeding and human reactivity test, because it seems to be more linked to the total MHA score. So yeah, no association between slow feeder and the osteopathic assessment, but we thought that maybe it was because we were looking at the global grade of the horse. So we tried to look at the different bodies area, so head, upper cervicals, muscle in the forehand, back line, and so on. But as you can see here, there were no difference between subtotals. So once again, we didn't have any association with the use of slow feeder. So no association, but we can also wonder about regular dispensers, because of course we also had in our control cohort horses that were using dispenser. It's just that it was not slow feeding dispenser, but still like hair rack or stuff like that. So we pulled control horses and slow feeder horses, and we performed a multivariate analysis. And we are looking at the total MHA score, depending on the four strata that I mentioned before, and the dispenser characteristic. So mobility, inclination, type of dispenser, whether or not the horse could access different height, but also the height of dispenser. And for that, we decided to use a ratio. And because all horses cannot always access the minimum height of forage, we also use what we call an access limit. And here the model that was selected was using age, shoes, housing, ratio height, and various height. However, our model explained only 13% of the variability, which means there are lots of either other factors or big inter-individual difference. So for the age, it's quite clear. The older the horse, the more osteopathic issue it was displaying. And for the housing, we can clearly see that the horses housed inside in groups were having more osteopathic issue. But here it seems that we have a confounding factor because it was mostly ponies from horse riding centers. And then for ratio height, this was really interesting because if we consider the loose hay, so hay on the ground as a baseline, we could see that for horses that were using...
Marie, could I
Sorry?
please ask you to, sorry for the interruption, but could I please ask you to skip to your conclusion
sorry.
slide because we're running out
Okay.
of time.
Okay, sorry, it was because of the... Okay.
It's okay.
So yeah, horses with, yeah, okay, never mind. And so the take-home message, the use of slow feeder was associated with shorter vibrissae and more inflamed gums. The use of slow feeder was not associated with the result of human reactivity test, but the osteo score was. The use of slow feeder was not associated with musculoskeletal health, and there seems to be association between the dispenser characteristic and the musculoskeletal health. But we need to be cautious and we need further analysis. Thank you for your attention. And sorry for this issue with the PowerPoint.
Thank you very much, Marie. I'm afraid that because we have run over time, we won't have any time for questions. So I will go on immediately to introducing the next speaker, which is Faye Tarantoni, who works at the Norwegian Meat and Poultry Research Center and will tell us how much is too much. And I guess that's something that we all need to know. So please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction. So how much is too much? Feeding black soldier fly larvae to laying hens. So the topic of using insects as feed for poultry is quite recent. It's only about a year ago that the EU lifted the ban on the use of all animal proteins in farm animal feed, and the original ban of course due to the prevention, control, and eradication of spongiform encephalopathy. So as of last year, it's now allowed to use processed proteins in poultry and pig feed. But why insects? So we've all heard these statistics that human population is increasing and it's expected to hit 9 billion by 2050. And with this increase in human population, there was a need for increased production of pig and poultry. And these animals also need to eat. So there is a concern that there will be a competition for protein specifically between human food and animal feed. So insects have been suggested as a high quality, efficient, and sustainable protein alternative. And within all insects available, which are a lot, the black soldier fly larvae have been, they've got extra attention for a few reasons. So one is they're very rich in protein, up to 65% of protein, and not just any protein, but they're very rich in methionine and lysine, which are essential amino acids that are hard to come by in protein of vegetable origin. So this table is horrible. I'm not going to spend any time on this other than to point out that the amount of lysine and methionine in the black soldier fly larva compared to soybean meal is like that or even higher. The black soldier fly also poses very low risk as an invasive alien, particularly in temperate climates like Europe, because they require tropical weather for growth and reproduction. So even if they were to escape a breeding facility, for example, they will eventually just die out. And they're not a disease vector, unlike the common housefly, for example, that spreads foodborne bacteria because of their food searching behavior. You know, it lands on feces and then lands on your feet. The black soldier fly, the fly only focuses on reproduction. It's only the larval stage that eats anything. And they are very good at turning organic waste into high value biomass. In fact, the best and most balanced diet for larvae are your kitchen scraps, so your leftover feed, and they have very good feed conversion ratio. So there's been already several studies looking at giving chickens, both laying hens and broilers, a little bit of larvae here and there, and to see what happens. For in the ethological part of things, there's definitely an interest in looking at how they would function as environmental enrichment. For a way to encourage natural behavior. They're obviously they're highly palatable to chickens. They love to eat it. So be a good way to potentially direct pecking at foraging and the litter rather than pecking each other. But there's still a lot that we don't know about what happens when you give larvae to chickens. So before we really can go into enrichment, we need to know how much larvae can chickens eat, how much larvae will they eat, what does the amount of larvae that they eat, how does that really affect the hen, and how does that affect egg production? And then how much should we give them, right? So that was what I aimed to answer these questions. So the aim of the study was to find the most suitable diet or size of daily larva portion for laying hens, particularly regarding to hen weight, feed consumption, and egg production and egg quality. So we had 40 bovine white hens from 16 to 30 weeks of age that were housed individually. And that was crucial because then I had very good control of exactly how much each hen was eating, not just of the larva, but also the concentrate and the egg that each hen was laying. And that's what's been missing from the literature. We divided these hens into 4 treatments with 10 hens per treatment. First treatment got 10% of their daily nutritional need in dry matter basis in larva. And that was equal to about 31 grams of larva per day. The second treatment got double that, so 20%, so 63 grams of larva. And then we had the third group was an ad libitum group where we gave them all the larvae they could possibly wish for. And we also separated the pellets. They had the cereals and the premix, which is the vitamins and the minerals in pelleted form, and all the soy was given in mash. So we could really see, will they eat more protein on top of the larva? And then of course we had a control group that just got standard commercial feed and no larva. So this is what the setup looked like. These cages, of course, litter, nest box, perch, drinking nipples, these orange feed buckets, so I could give all the different components of the feed, and these red buckets were the larvae were. And these had quite a wide brim to keep the larvae from crawling out, because if they were alive, very, very happy to crawl about. But the hen was still very capable of putting her head in there and eating them. So this, for example, is hen number 3. She was in the ad libitum group, and you can see she had plenty of room in there. These were her feed buckets, and I had tight control of the eggs that she laid, also what day of the week they were laid. In terms of data collection, we looked at feed intake. So we measured daily consumption of larvae and weekly consumption of the concentrate. We measure weekly hen weight. In terms of egg production, we looked at the number of eggs, so laying percentage, but also egg weight, shell thickness, force, albumin height, Hall unit, and yolk color. And then at the end of the study, when the hens were 31 weeks of age, we culled all of them and we did a post-mortem assessment where we took the weight of these organs. So the proventriculus, the gizzard, the lizard, the liver, and abdominal fat. So this is the first graph here. This is larva consumption. Unfortunately, I have 5 of these very boring graphs to show you. So let's stay a little bit here to understand what we're looking at. So here we have live larvae in grams per day and the weeks of the study. I had the hens from week 16, but the first 2 weeks were habituation. So official start of the study was week 18. Green line are the 10% hens, so the ones that got 31 grams of larva, and then 20% hens, and then the gray line are the ad libitum hens. Obviously, we don't have a control line here because they didn't get any larva, so nothing in terms of larva consumption. So here what we can see is that the 10% and the 20% hens, they ate all of their larva portion every day from day 1 all the way to the end, no variation. They loved that stuff, it was gone. Now with the ad libitum curve, we see a couple of things. One is that the larva consumption increased from week 18 to week 21. And that was because I had no idea what ad libitum was when we started. And what this graph shows you is that I was wrong 4 weeks in a row until finally at 21 weeks, gradually increasing the amount of larva, producing more larva. I got to the point that every hen in that group was consistently leaving behind. They couldn't eat all of the larva that I was giving them in the 24 hours that I was giving them. So from 21 weeks ad libitum. And also we can see quite a bit of variation here, right? Versus the 10% and 20%, there are no error bars there because they were all eating everything. Okay, so like I said, 3 or 4 more of these boring graphs to go. So I want to show you something nice, which is a video of hens eating larvae, which should hopefully work. No, come on. Is the one fun thing I have in this presentation. Here we go. It's going to be a bit slow for some reason. I guess this computer is trying his best. You're doing so well. Good job. So what we can see here, we're putting the contents of this pre-weighed portion of larva into the bowl. The larvae, you may be able to see they're alive, they're moving, they're quite well there. Let's not talk about insect welfare in this meeting, in this presentation. And if you know anything about hens, you can tell that this hen is quite excited about the larvae are coming. Her neighbor already got her portion. And maybe I'll skip a little bit because, nope, that was too much. Right, so you can see here, she won't even wait for us to close the door of the cage before she's happily climbing all over us. So they really liked the larva. This was standard reaction of the 20% and the 10% hens. The alyptum hens, they became quite cavalier about the larva, like, yeah, whatever, what else is new? All right, so let's go back to the boring graphs. Concentrate consumption. So now a very similar graph, we have concentrate consumption in kilos and the weeks of age, and now we have the control line as well. And what we can see here, of course, the control group ate more concentrates than all of the larva group. And we can see that the larva line is almost a perfect reflection of, of the larva consumption. So as larva consumption went up, the concentrate consumption went down. In terms of hen weight, there was no difference at the end of the study between the control and the 10% or the 20% hens, but the alyptum hens, they gained a lot of weight. In terms of total protein consumption, again, no difference between the control and the 10% on their total. So protein coming from both the larva and the concentrate, but of course the alyptum were consuming a lot more protein. But more interesting than total protein consumption is the concentrate protein consumption. So how much of the concentrate protein are we substituting by giving larva? And here what we can see is that the 10%, 20% and the control really didn't differ. Both the 20% and the alyptum hens were consuming less protein or concentrate protein, but at the end of the study, they were both consuming the same amount of protein as each other, just less as the control. In terms of egg quality, boring table here, but just to say there was no treatment effects on any of these egg quality parameters and also not on egg laying percentage, but there was an effect on egg yolk color, which was that the alyptum hens, the yolk began to become paler and paler and paler with time, which is understandable because the carotenoids that give the color of the yolk are put in the concentration and they were not eating so much concentration. And in terms of the post-mortem assessment, there was no difference between the treatments in the weight of the gizzard and the liver, but there were differences in the proventriculus. Again, it was only between the alyptum and all of the others. So the alyptum hens had 22% heavier proventriculi than the other hens. So the proventriculus is the glandular part of the stomach, the one that secretes digestive enzymes. So it seems like the alyptum access to larva was creating a so yeah, proventriculus, and they became very fat, as we already saw. Yes, so just to say that the alyptum hens, they ate 163 grams of larva per day, which is insane because a hen normally eats about 110 grams of concentrate per day. So they were eating 100 more than that in just larva. And they consumed 40% less concentrate. So absolutely alyptum is too much. That's the take home message here, but 20% seems to be a quite good level of larva inclusion in poultry feed. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye, and sorry for scaring you with my scary notes.
No, that's okay, that's okay.
We have a question from the floor there.
I feel like I should congratulate you for sitting through so many boring graphs about feed consumption.
Hi, I'm Langbert from Dummersdorf, Germany. I'm wondering if you have any information about how long it takes the animals, the hens, to feed the 10 and 20% amount of larvae?
Anecdotally, 5 minutes. They are very enthusiastic and it goes quite fast. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, we have a question in the back there.
Yeah.
Can't see.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
okay.
That was a nice presentation, but I have a question for you concerning the 61% increase in the abdominal fat. What do you think that's the implication of that on the egg laying production parameters?
That's a very good question. So in this study, there wasn't any nothing horribly wrong with the health of the hens at the end, but they were 31 weeks of age. So they were at the peak of lay, they should be really nice. If we were to continue with this kind of feeding regime for the whole laying period, it's very likely that this weight difference would continue, if not increase, and that would absolutely expect some health problems for the hen. Yeah. And as rich as these larvae are in protein, they're also very, very rich in fat, which is what happened there. So I would not recommend it.
I see there's some more questions for the floor, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So I really advise you to take it up in the coffee break. So we'll thank Faye again. And then we'll move on to the next presentation in this session, which is once again online. This time we will be listening to Stephanie Schevers from the University of Veterinary Medicine in Hanover. And she will tell us about the effects of rearranged drinking systems for turkeys. So Stephanie, the floor is yours. Stephanie, are you muted in any way on your side, or we cannot hear you?
Can you hear me now?
I did, but I'll try again. Stephanie, I hope that
Yes.
you can hear.
I
You're
can
here?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you very much.
Okay, so have you heard anything or not at all?
It is a bit faint, so can I please ask you to speak up clearly?
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, let me first give you a short introduction into the equipment and problems of turkey farming. In conventional turkey barns, the drinkers are set up in lines. So usually we have 4 lines. As you can see in the picture on the right, you can see these red objects, which are the drinkers. And you can see 2 lines on every side of the barn. This setup usually means that there is not a lot of free floor space. And usually the floor around the drinkers is wet, which may lead to increased food pad dermatitis in the turkeys. And our goal in this trial was to increase the dry free floor space. Let me tell you something about the materials and methods we used. First, let's talk about the barn. The trial was conducted at a conventional turkey farm, and we had 2 barns with 3,600 male BUT6 turkeys per barn. And we had a control barn with a standard drinker setup, which I've shown you before, with drinkers in 4 lines, and a trial barn where we took the 40 Plesson Bell drinkers and rearranged them into drinking bars of 5 drinkers each. By this rearrangement, we increased the free floor space. So we had free floor space in the middle and also between the drinking bars. We used 3 fattening periods. Here you can see the setup. On the left side, we have the trial barn before and after the rearrangement. So on the very left, you can see the usual setup with drinkers in lines and the feeding line in between 2 drinking lines. And the right scheme shows you the drinking bars, 5 drinkers and 4 bars on every side. And on the right picture, you can see 1 drinking bar, and you see that there's a free floor space in between these bars. Now for the video recording, we used a continuous recording from week 5, when the animals entered the barn, until removal, which was done in week 21. The recorded area covered half of one drinking bar and half of one resting area between the bars, the trial barn, and the corresponding area in the control barn. For the evaluation, we used a spot sampling, and we selected 1 day per week, and this was a day where not a lot of work was done in the barn, in order to prevent that the animals were disturbed by persons working in the barn. We viewed 10 minutes of every hour and counted the events of agonistic comfort, drinking, and resting behavior. Below you can see our isogram. For agonistic behavior, we counted fighting, aggressive pecking, and feather pecking. Comfort behavior was stretching of wings or legs, and manipulation of their own feathers, and a full body shake. Drinking behavior was obviously drinking from a drinker, and resting behavior was lying, either sleeping or also non-sleeping, for at least 30 seconds. For the statistical analysis, we used R version 4.1.3, and we had fixed effects with the barn, week, phase of day, which we distributed into early day, late day, and night, and the fattening period and an interaction. Now I'd like to present you some results. First, let's start with the agonistic events. As you can see here in this figure, the number of agonistic events per week increased from week 17 on in the trial barn, especially during the nights, as you can see here. And this is probably due to less space around the individual drinkers, and therefore we have more agonistic events around the drinkers. And this leads to an increased number of total agonistic events. Now we have comfort events. You can also see here an increase from week 16 on. So we can say that this is probably due to more free floor space in T, therefore the animals showed more comfort behavior in the trial barn. Now let's talk about drinking events. You can also see here during late fattening, during the late days, the drinking events in the trial barn were higher, which is probably due to a higher number of agonistic behavior around the drinkers, as I've shown you before. Therefore, this leads to a decreased drinking time, and therefore the animals had to approach the drinkers more often, and therefore we have a higher number of individual drinking events in order to fulfill their need for water. Now the last results slide are the resting events. As we can see, the animals in the control barn showed more resting events, which is probably due to more active turkeys. This was also what the farmer told us, that the turkeys in the trial barn were a lot more active than in the control barn. And also, as I've said before, we had a higher number of approaches to drinkers which were necessary. And this both leads to less resting events. As a conclusion, we can say that these results I've shown you might show an effect of barn. We had 3 fattening periods which we investigated, but unfortunately we were not able to change the barn. So the trial barn was always a trial barn. The control barn was always the control barn. And therefore we can say that further investigations about this might be necessary. But it's of course true that the increased free floor space offers more surface for the animals to move around and to show their natural behavior. And we can also say that the arrangement of drinkers in the trial barn was a lot suboptimal. The drinkers were too close together, therefore the animals had less space around the drinkers, which is especially true during late fattening periods when the animals grow really big. And this leads to less animals that were able to drink simultaneously. And therefore, as I've shown you, we see this increased approaches to drinkers during late days and nights when the animals were usually resting. And we can see this reduced resting behavior during these normal resting periods. Yes, thank you very much for your attention, and I am pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, I see a hand there.
Hey, thank you very much for your talk. I was interested in the agonistic interactions and how you might kind of solve those while giving them more floor space. Do you think that the answer is that they just need more space overall and the same drinkers, or is there a different type of drinker that you would try instead?
Yes, we would set up the drinkers differently. These Plaisson drinkers are usually good, but because the drinkers were so close together that there was no space between individual drinkers, the space for animals around the drinkers was not enough. So I'd say that probably it's better not to use drinking bars, but to put the inner drinking lines into the outer drinking lines without bars. So we have free floor space in the middle of the barn, but not between drinking bars. This would be better, I think. Does this answer your question?
I see a nod here. So yes, you have answered your question. Are there any more questions for Stephanie? If not, I think we'll just thank her again for her excellent presentation. And that will conclude our session. So we can head over to the coffee break.